Today we're going to break down flow and nutrient export. The last one we did was lighting. I know there was a lot of information in that one, so I kind of like to do the same on flow and nutrient export. But I did want to mention, so last weekend at Reefapalooza in New York, we got a phenomenal turnout, and the amount of support for our YouTube channel and the videos that we do, I kind of want to thank everybody for. Unbelievable. I really had no idea that we were that impactful, and it kind of drives us to want to do more, bigger, and better. So hopefully today's video is just that, flow and nutrient export. I think it's a super hot topic, and I think that there's going to be a couple aha moments here to take away from. In years past, or in some of the most recent videos, I think Ryan from Bulk Reef Supply and then Worldwide Corals, we kind of got together and we talked about the word nutrients. And I think that there's a little bit of a misconception about what that really is, because when I talk to people, they tend to think that I'm talking about nitrate and phosphate when I mention the word nutrients. And I really don't mean that at all. So me specifically, when I say those words nutrients, I'm talking about available materials in the tank. And I know that's very vague, but I'll go into why. So if we're feeding heavily in a tank, we're putting in a lot of nutrients. So that's an available food source. You can break that apart two different ways. You can say that's the food that we're feeding, that's the quantity of fish that are populating the tank, in turn feeding your corals. But then you can also say the byproduct, which is nitrogen and phosphorus, and this is also a sustainable source of nutrient for your corals. It's no different from plants. You know, we look for fertilizers that have nitrogen and phosphorus in them in certain quantities. And in this case, what we're looking for is nitrate and phosphate at a certain moderate level, depending on the system. You know, it may be higher, maybe lower, but we're looking for a consistent value for those parameters to remain at in order to create an environment in which all your corals thrive. You know, whether you keep your nitrates high or whether you keep your nitrates low, whether you keep your phosphates high or phosphates low, providing you always do that and you understand how to manipulate it, that is the difference between having high nutrient or low nutrient, in my opinion. So we're going to talk about food, we're going to talk about nitrate and phosphate, and we're going to talk about how to manipulate it. And that's where flow and nutrient export kind of come together to be the same thing, but different. The way that I'm going to explain this is we're going to talk about this vessel here being our tank and overflow in a way. This top-down box is going to represent just a catch vessel, but it's also going to represent a sump. It doesn't matter if we're talking about an all-in-one tank. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a tank with a sump. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a small tank or a big tank. When plumbing moves water from one place to another, the water is being manipulated. And it's our job as a hobbyist to take advantage of how that works so that it can work the best for us. I'm gonna take a little bit of water. I'm gonna fill this cup up, okay. This is representing a return pump filling the tank. And as it fills up, it's just about to crest the overflow. And the idea is that the property that water has, called surface tension, allows things to move together as if it was one. And what makes this cool is that you know that as the tank is filling, everything is moving in one direction. Okay. So now we're going to exaggerate this a little bit. So we're looking to add some sort of particulate to the water column. And the easiest way to do this is to add some flake. I'm going to put some flake food in the corner of that container. And as I add water to it, it's going to float upward. So this is a return pump filling the tank, but also a power head stirring it. And there's two separate components there. Some of it will sink, some of it will float. If we think about the way that we want this to work, we want all this to be removed from the aquarium and going down the overflow. So we kind of have to have a pretty rapid movement of water in order for that to happen. And as you see, eventually, with enough turnover, it'll all end up in our sump. Or, in the best way to put it, it's going to go through our filtration. Now let's assume that we don't have enough power head to move this stuff around in the tank. So it's not being suspended, exactly like what's happening right now. It's falling to the bottom of the tank. But we have just a little bit of return. How long is it going to take for all that particulate to work its way out of the aquarium? It's going to be very, very slow. And what's going to happen is you're going to be asking your tank to decompose that matter at a faster rate. Because if you had enough power head, and if you had enough return, we could get it all out of the tank really quickly. And then it's going to go through your filtration, and either your roller mat is going to take it out, your filter sock, whatever kind of mechanical filtration that you're using is going to catch this stuff, and we discard it. We get it out of the aquarium, we get it out of the water, even more so, and it doesn't have to actually break down. So you're producing less ammonia, which makes for less nitrate in the end. This is the most simple form that I can figure out how to explain that. But if you look at all the particulate that ended up inside of this top-down box, you know that that's what's happening real time in your aquarium, but at a very expedited pace. And with smaller particulate than what we're seeing. So all that stuff counts as nitrate in the end, and very much so phosphate. I just filled, this is a common all-in-one tank. I think it's a Tideline 10. And the reason why I wanted to fill this up and go over a demonstration with this is because I think there's a lot lost in what we expect out of these tanks. Just to kind of go over the components so that we're all talking the same lingo, this is called the return. This nozzle here is attached to the return pump. So if you ever hear me say the word return, I'm not talking about where the water returns to the sump. I'm talking about the water that returns from the sump. So the return is the pump, and then the return chamber is the very last chamber that the pump is in. This is the drain, right? Obviously it's draining from the aquarium. Generally speaking, this compartment here is where you're gonna have either a filter cup with floss in it, whether it's got a filter sock, doesn't matter if it's mesh or if it's felt. And then these partitions are what we call baffles. These baffles serve a purpose. I wanted to show this with the vinyl off the back so that you could actually see the motion of water. So as it comes in, it's forced to go through what we call mechanical filtration. This is what's responsible for taking out all of the large particulate. And it's generally measured by micron. I would assume that this is a 200 micron mesh sock. But as it works its way through, it's going to go up through this baffle. And then right here is where the majority of the bubbles, if there's any kind of micro bubbles, they're going to work their way up to the surface here, and they'll pop. If they're large enough and there's enough proteins in the water, sometimes it'll make its way down. And that's what you see here, these little bubbles that are falling. We want this. This is actually where oxygen enters into the water column. So this gas exchange here is actually more important than we give it credit for. Then this water weight right here is actually pushing down, and it's forcing water back up through this last baffle. The most important thing to acknowledge here is the height difference from the aquarium water to the sock, and then again to this center compartment, and then again into this pump chamber. Why? Because like I demonstrated in our little cup with the flake food, we're asking water to move in one unanimous body, but it carries particulate with it. In order to get water to go from point A, which is the aquarium, to B, to C, to D, and then back to the aquarium again, it has to move through these passages. These passages, because they're purposed to filter, oxygenate, and then move it to the return chamber, they have to cascade from one level to the next. The most common mistake and I'll say this a million times over, the most common mistake when people have systems set up and they just can't figure out how to get their water to clarify. They're saying, I've got so much particulate, my water is murky, it just never looks good. The reason why is it's not filtering. What happens when I put too much water in the tank? Watch this. Another thing to note, I get asked, do I put water in the top or the bottom? It doesn't matter. It's the same. If I put water here, it changes back here too. All right, I'm almost to that point. Right here. That is the point you do not want to be above. Watch these bubbles right here. They circle. Bubbles pop. If this was particulate, it would just circle right there. And this isn't even exaggerated. I see almost every new hobbyist take this tank and they fill it like this. See, I'm starting to lose this level now. See that curve right there? That's the motion of water. You can see, it's like a, what do they call it, meniscus? Can you see the particulate on the top of this water right here? It's very small. That should never, ever, ever stay in that center compartment. That should be forced to be moving its way into that compartment. But because it doesn't fall from here to here, and then yet again from here down, it's never going to be drawn that way. So this stuff just sits here and rots. What if that's excess food? That food has to, one, degrade, and that's going to produce ammonia. Two, of course, nitrate cycle through after that. And then you're wondering why, man, my nitrates are always high. This is a direct reason. We haven't even started talking about power heads yet. This is just how your tank functions without its power heads. And this is critical. This is like flow and nutrient export fundamental 101. If you're getting anything at the surface of the water and it stays there, it's because it's not moving. And if it's not moving, that means it's sitting there rotting. This is the number one reason why you end up with nitrate elevation. Always. I'm gonna take that same flake food. That's about how much most of the time gets thrown in a 10-gallon aquarium. Give or take, maybe a little bit less, maybe that's exaggerated. But you'd be surprised, you see a lot. Okay, so something to note, if you look on the front side here, where this is actually called a weir, where the water is being skimmed into the rear component or the rear chamber, it's sitting against that grate. That's not going through the filter, so it's sitting there decaying before it even makes its way to your filter. But look at this, extra waste is making it back into this compartment. This should never happen. Never. And then eventually it's going to make its way over here. But look at how slow and dramatic that is. It's dramatically slower than it was before. So it's not making its way all the way through. Look how much is still circling around in the tank. So I know I'm kind of being dramatic about this, but this is the reality. This happens way, way, way more than you think. So how do we fix it? We're going to start by taking water out. But watch this. What did I talk about? As long as water falls, it catches stuff. If I go like this, I can catch particles. Just like that. And if you watch, this water level here is going to fall again. And everything will be sped up. I know I'm talking to a lot of beginners and a lot of young, enthusiastic hobbyists when I do these kind of videos. But if we don't understand the fundamentals, what happens when you get into more of an advanced setting? You still apply the same principles. You hear me say over and over again that I like to solve problems by understanding each scenario. So now as I take water out, it begs the question, where should you keep this chamber? I use a couple indicators. One, noise. I don't want a loud tank. Personally, I think that's obnoxious. Some people like it, but I don't want a loud tank myself. So I try to keep this fall right here shallow enough so that it's not making that cascading noise, but also exaggerated enough to force particulate. Look at how fast that water is moving through there now. But if you look on this side, where the grates are, because this water is lower on this side, there's nothing being stuck to the overflow again, or to the weir. It's actually passing it through there because it's violent enough to suck it down like it's being flushed. And then also, you can see this here is being held down by the weight of the water moving through it. So you'll get even less yet underneath this sock. If we recap that, keeping the water level inside of your sump at the appropriate level is going to make your filtration work more efficiently. Also, keeping the water level correct, you're oxygenating the water and you're keeping your tank at a higher pH because of the introduction of O2. I have a little strip of filter floss. So if you have a filter cup, you're fixated on getting that really polished water. A lot of times I see people take floss and they stuff too much inside of the filter. And take note of that earlier water level and take note now of this water level. As this plugs up with organic matter, what's going to end up happening is it's slowing the water movement from right to left. And this water level will eventually go down. And in a small tank like this, changes in salinity are crucial. So if you've got a top-off sensor here measuring for this level to always be the same, it's compensating by adding fresh water back. And when you do that, your salinity goes down because you're adding more total water to the system. Because this stopped water from moving to here, and that level dropped, and your top-off adds fresh water back. So careful, if you're gonna polish your water, make sure you're keeping a constant eye on that this water level doesn't change because you add too much floss. I mean, just this much water here in this tank could be the difference between the tank being 1.025 and 1.026. So we talked about establishing water level in the sump. Give yourself a little Sharpie mark so that every time you top off, you're marking it to the same level. That way you avoid any of those salinity related problems. Next, we got to talk about the display. When we normally talk about flow, we're talking about the power heads and how it moves through the aquarium. The fundamental basic here that since the beginning of this video I've tried to convey is our goal with anything flow related is to create an efficiency in the water filtration. So in my mind, if I was adding a power head, I'm going to exaggerate it on this side. Because if we do that properly, we're going to be sweeping the bottom, or we're sweeping the rocks wherever the largest obstruction is. We want that washed clean so that that can make its way up and into the opposite side. So if I was to put a power head in this tank, I would not put it underneath this drain because then it's stopping the fluid motion. We want to continue the fluid motion. So our goal would either be to put it back here on this side, facing here, or put it here, facing this way, because we're going to get more of that circular rotation towards the drain. The only thing that we didn't discuss is tanks that don't have a sump. This is tricky, and I'd actually like to take you to the farm and show you. We have 20-gallon tanks there. They have just a hang-on filter and a power head. And you hear me say a lot, we're solving problems. So the problem is the filtration is poor with a hang-on filter. And the solution is using your power heads and the quantity and type of food that you feed, along with the type of fish that you have, to minimize the amount of waste. Because we're asking a substandard product to do a job of a messy marine aquarium, and that's tough. Okay, so back in the conference room, we talked a lot about how water moves through the aquarium, what we can do to help the filters do their job better, and what not to do, right? So I kind of wanted to put a little bit of real world here into the video. This is a 20-gallon tank that Braxton takes care of in our farm. It has a simple hang-on filter, and the only thing that's in this is filter floss. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about why this works. because I don't think it's important to talk about what it is. It's important to talk about why it works, because like I said, I say this a lot. We like to solve problems. All we're solving problems. So the problem here is we have inferior filtration. That means that for the amount of waste that's in this aquarium, we have not enough filtration to remove it. You can see that it's a hang-on filter, so it's sucking it up from the bottom, which normally a drain is draining from the top, which, like we said in the other part where we were talking in the office, we're asking everything to come to the surface. And here, we're actually picking it up through this little pickup tube. It's a little bit counterintuitive. So what we've done is, on the other side, there's a power head that pushes everything across to this side of the tank. And it's subtle. You can see we've got big, full leathers. We've got nice, slow-moving gonnies. We've got acans with big, stout polyps. Mushrooms that are laying their skirt out across the sand bed. So you can tell there's not a ton of flow in here. But it's efficient because this is elevated. If you look, that power head is very high. And what it's doing is it's taking all that slick that happens at the surface of the water and it's pushing it across to this pickup tube. So let's just quick look at the way that the water moves through the aquarium. You see that cascade coming across the top is dropping down. And you can see where the brine shrimp, how slow it moves through the tank. But as long as we don't feed too much, and these fish are actually eating everything out of the water column, then we're not asking the filter to do too much. He does do regular water changes, he has to. And then also the sand bed has to get cleaned periodically. But if you take note, there's a ton of little blue leg hermit crabs in here. This helps make all of it work. So what does get trapped up in the substrate and the rocks, the little hermit crabs are cleaning up, because if we didn't have them, then it would be sitting there decaying. And rather, we have them eat it, they defecate, and then we do a water change and it keeps it down. So the bio in this tank is really what is the heart and soul of its filtration. The filtration is so insufficient here, we're really only utilizing that to polish the water. Honestly, I think he's done a really good job. Look at all the purple coralline algae. The coralline algae tells us that there's not filamentous algae growing everywhere. Yeah, I just wanted to show you there's nothing to this tank besides rock and a little polishing filter. And obviously the power head for doing the bulk of the work. Okay, so we're gonna make this quick because we're opening the store and there's gonna be a lot of interference here, but I really wanted to talk about this because we're setting up a brand new Nios Opus in place of our old aqua illumination tank here. And I wanted to talk about this one specifically because it's a bare scape. There's no rock. The only thing that's in here right now is rubble and water. Part of what we discussed when we were doing the demonstration with the 10-gallon tank is how the water moved through the tank. We didn't go into much detail about a tank with a sump. And I think it's important to acknowledge a couple of things. One, the volume of water that you move through the drain is going to impact noise, but it's also going to impact how much waste goes down the drain. So we've got here an Orbit from AI, we've got blades from AI, we've got the Nios Opus, we've got a Vectra S2. In most newer tank designs, there's a gate valve, and this gate valve allows us to control the amount of drain noise, but also in return, it coincides with how much flow moves through the tank. And this is important because I'm not going to tell you what size pump, how much volume on what tank. I won't do that. I don't want to talk about specifics because I like to talk about theory. And in this theory, what's important is this drain has only, let's see, 8 inches of weir. And what that means is you can't run too much flow through it, or else this water level will ride high on the overflow. And then you kind of teeter on the dangerous side, where if something happens to the drain, the tank could overflow, or you're going to make too much noise, so on and so forth. So the larger the amount of surface area for your weir, the more return you can put into the tank, which also means better filtration. Most of these big box tanks, they're gonna have sufficient overflows. They're also gonna have sufficient drain pipes. So if you're feeling like it's just noisy and you can't figure out how to dial it in, chances are you probably should turn it down some. Like I said, with this being a blank slate, I can throw a little bit of flake in here like I did with that 10-gallon tank, and we can see until the flake saturates with water, it floats on the surface. And what we're wanting is to see it go up against the drain there, onto the weir on the back wall. And what we're seeing is that it's not. So first it's falling, okay? We're hoping in a normal scenario that the fish eat all that. But in the event that it doesn't, we want that power head to be oriented in a way that it's keeping it suspended until it does actually drain. So there's a lot to dial in here. If you ask me, the power head's not gonna stay on the back wall. And then also, if you ask me, there's probably not enough return. This is a common occurrence in tanks where everybody wants to put the power head on the back for that clean, seamless look. Unfortunately, most of the time that doesn't work well because they put them high on the back wall, and you're wanting actually for the flow to circle from the back wall up and then toward the drain. So believe it or not, putting it lower on the tank on the back is better than putting it high on the tank in the back. Not necessarily optimal because then you don't get all that surface turbulence. So just play around with it. If you want the power heads on the back of the tank, you're gonna have to really figure out what works best when it comes to getting the waste suspended in the tank so that it can go down the drain without impeding the direction of flow toward the weir. Because the sump is no different from a all-in-one tank, where the water drains from the top, where it goes into the sock, as long as all the water is going into the sock, it goes into this big skimmer compartment, and then in the back, the very last component is where it goes into the pump chamber. Remember, you want that fall into the pump chamber. So that's a little bit high for my taste. When we add this top off, I'm gonna drop that probably 3/4 of an inch just so we get that really good cascade. And then if it goes too far of a cascade, you're gonna see bubbles inside of the tank. So this is borderline, it's right in the middle. It's a little bit too high, but it's not making bubbles. Aside from that, I mean, when you're dialing in a tank for the first time, you focus on the movement of particulate, you make sure that your drain's not noisy and it's not gonna overflow, and then you make sure your filter sock is catching all the particulate. That's really all the basics that we need to talk about here. So I'm excited for this tank. Well, I wanted to come back and do a recap on the video and kind of go over some of the points that we mentioned. But organically, I thought it was important to show 30 minutes later, there's still particulate floating around in this water. That was overfed and properly moving through the tank. So for any of you who have a heavy hand when it comes to feeding, this is the result. And you can't blame anybody for your water quality being a struggle besides yourself. That being said, I kind of want to circle back around and mention that this video was entirely put together so that we could digest the theories and the concept behind flow and nutrient export and how critical it is to color your coral. I think because what gets lost in the message here is coral color is nothing more than an indication of your coral's health. The health of the coral is reliant on those things that I mentioned in the first video, which was lighting, flow, nutrient export, husbandry, water chemistry, and patience. All of which, when you put them together in one big bundle, no matter how much information is there, you have to understand that without those things being on a high level of importance to you as the hobbyist or us as a caregiver for these corals, you're never going to have really beautiful coral. And maybe what you think is beautiful is good enough for you, but there may be more left untapped. This video was entirely to break down flow and nutrient export, and I really hope that it was helpful. And this kind of content really resonates with me because as somebody who helps coach people along their journey in the reefing community, I get a lot of questions about, you know, why nitrates and phosphates are such a mess in their aquarium and how they deal with algae all the time and things like that. This is the core. Like, if you can figure this out, you don't deal with those problems anymore. So really take that home. I hope this kind of content is good for the viewing public, because I really think the feedback that I got from Reefapalooza was exceptional, and I couldn't be happier. We're going to keep it coming. I've got a couple more on the same topic of coral coloration. I think next time we're going to discuss husbandry. So if that's something that's up your alley or you've got questions about, stay tuned for the next video. I really like asking you guys to like and subscribe to our channel, because it really does mean a lot to us. So if you like this content and it's helpful to you, don't forget, go back. We've got 2 more videos. We've got the original coral coloration video, and then we also have the video that I just did last weekend on lighting, both of which cover a lot of detail. So make sure you check them out. And don't forget, the beginning of September, we're going out to Reefapalooza in Anaheim. So don't forget, save that spot on your calendar, and we'll see you then.